Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about the pre-Socratic philosopher Parmenides. Now, Parmenides was his ideas were kind of related to a number of other thinkers among the pre-Socratics, but he also really challenged a lot of the fundamental perspectives that other thinkers took. So in the introduction here, in the Patricia Curd edited pre-Socratics reader from Hackett, it says, Diogenes Laertius says that he was a student of Xenophanes, but did not follow him, and that he was also associated at some time in his life with the Pythagoreans, although he rejected their theories as well. Actually, Parmenides really, he takes a very different position than a lot of the other pre-Socratic thinkers, and that puts him really at odds with them in some ways, because a lot of the other pre-Socratics are interested in the idea that matter can change, or that... Sorry, my cat was attacking the leg of my chair here. Or that things exist beyond just the physical world, or that reality is in some way mutable, is in some way changeable. Parmenides basically rejects that idea outright, and essentially, so he's a guy who's interested in ontology, and to a lesser extent, epistemology. So, ontology basically is the study of what is, the forms of things in themselves. Epistemology is the study of how we know the things that we know. What does it mean to know something? How do we gather knowledge? How do we assess knowledge? How do we learn, etc., etc.? One of the problems with it, this is my take on it, and I'm not an ontologist. I've read a lot of philosophy, but I'm not a trained philosopher. My problem with ontology, and therefore my problem with Parmenides, who is really an ontologist, is that ontology is kind of dependent on the existence of something regardless of our senses. That is, more specifically, regardless of our ability to measure, to understand, to assess that thing. So, does God exist, for instance, is an ontological question. It is a question about the existence of God in and of himself, herself, themselves, itself, whatever. It is a question about the objective existence of that thing. The epistemological question would be, do we know God exists? And if so, how do we know? So it's a question about knowing. The problem is, it's hard to establish the ontological existence of something. That is, it's hard to establish the objective existence of a particular thing without reliance on epistemological tools. Sorry, my cat is screaming. So for me, that's a big problem with ontology, is that it requires the tools of epistemology, but it also, sometimes ontologists, including Parmenides, are very critical of epistemology as more limited in scope than what ontology attempts to discover. So, let's look at what Parmenides actually says here. So he writes his philosophy in the form of poetry, as so many of the pre-Socratics did. And his poem is a sort of Homeric odyssey, almost, a Homeric journey in which the speaker of the poem, presumably Parmenides himself, goes on a journey to the home of the goddess. Frank, shush. To the home of the goddess. In this translation, it doesn't say what goddess it is, but the introductory material says this is doxa, which is beliefs or opinions, so personified. And the goddess tells him, there is need for you to learn all things, both the unshaken heart of persuasive truth and the opinions of mortals, in which there is no true reliance. But nevertheless you will need to learn these too, that the things that appear must genuinely be, being always indeed all things. So we start here with a division between the actual truth of things, which for Parmenides, as we'll see increasingly, is consistent. Things are what they are. If a thing exists, it exists in its form, and it has always existed and always will exist. He rejects the idea of change. Not in the sense of I don't know, I don't think this is in the sense of he would say an acorn doesn't become an oak tree or something like that, but more in the sense of maybe almost I'm not really clear here. This is either in the sense maybe of the Platonic forms, the oak tree always exists, or this is in some sort of more metaphysical sense where it's because the oak tree will exist, it always exists in its current form. I don't know. It's not super clear because this is not, he's not giving practical examples here. Parmenides is really relying on logic in this sort of abstract theoretical sense, more than he is on, here are concrete examples to illustrate the principles I'm talking about. But this idea that I wrote down here, what is as it is and must always be. What isn't is unthinkable and unsayable. And I know that's not super clear, but what I mean by what is as it is. Too many uses of the word is, I know, but I kind of like it. So anything that exists the way that it does, the way that it must always have existed and must always exist into the future. Anything that doesn't exist is unsayable and unthinkable. It is beyond conception. Therefore, anything that can be thought, anything that can be, is and always has been. Again, I'm not super sold on this idea of Parmenides, but he puts it in another way here. The only ways of inquiry there are for thinking, the one that it is and that it is not possible for it not to be, is the path of persuasion, for it attends upon truth. The other, that it is not and that it is necessary for it not to be. This I point out to you to be a path completely unlearnable, for neither may you know that which is not, for it is not to be accomplished, nor may you declare it. So again, basically what that means, it's not super clear in terms of the language that he's using, but basically he's trying to make the logical case that the truth is anything that exists, always existed, and always will exist. It does not change. It simply is. anything that does not exist, anything that could change, does not exist. It simply isn't, and it's therefore unknowable. It is beyond the scope of possibility, I guess. There's another bit here where he explains this again, maybe a little bit clearer. He says, "That which is there to be spoken and thought of must be, for it is possible for it to be, but not possible for nothing to be. I bid you consider this. For I bar you from this first way of inquiry, but next from the way on which mortals, knowing nothing, two-headed, wander. For helplessness in their breasts guides their wandering mind, but they are carried on equally deaf and blind, amazed, hordes without judgment, for whom both to be and not to be are judged the same and not the same, and the path of all is backward turning." So again, this is this idea that anything that isn't can't be thought, can't be created, etc., and anything that is and always has been and always will be. The other element here is a critique of epistemology. So that's the ontological argument from Parmenides. The other side is an epistemological critique of pretty much everybody else in the world who thinks differently, including most of the pre-Socratics who embraced the idea that things can change or transform. This idea of the way of mortals, knowing nothing, two-headed wander, for helplessness in their breast guides their wandering mind, but they are carried on equally deaf and blind, amazed, hordes without judgment, etc., etc. This whole bit is basically a critique of ontology. People think that they know things, but what they actually fail to understand is precisely the truth of things. So, little bit arrogant maybe there. Everybody else is wrong, and I've got the actual truth. But this is Parmenides' epistemological component. This idea that there are fundamental flaws in the way that most people think about and encounter the world, because they buy into this illusion of change, this illusion that things can reformulate themselves, that matter can undergo transformation, etc., etc. So actually, I think that's actually a really good one. The idea, there's an idea in physics, I think that now does not necessarily still regarded as true, that nothing can be created from nothing. I think quantum physics has sort of disrupted that idea, but I'm not a science person. But Parmenides would be right on board with that. Like, anything that exists, and nothing can be created out of nothingness. Maybe this is the best sort of gloss of Parmenides in this case. The last excerpt in this book from Parmenides I want to give you, I think maybe puts it a little more directly and straightforwardly. It just says, "Such unchanging is that for which, as a whole, the name is to be." So anything that has even the potential to exist is unchanging. It is what it is, it exists in the form that it always has and will existed. That is the nature of being for Parmenides.